Good evening, and welcome to the Newman Center. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Barbara Kreisman and Dr. Gail Varner.
Hello and welcome. Welcome back for our second of the series this year, the Voices of Experience series. I am Barbara Kreisman. I'm Associate Dean of the Daniels College of Business, and it's my great pleasure to extend a warm welcome to you this evening. Tonight's program, featuring Tom Kelley, co-founder of IDEO, is part of the Daniels Signature Speaker Series. We believe it is particularly relevant to be hosting this event on Veterans Day and want to acknowledge all of the vets and our current military personnel with us tonight. Of which Dr. Gail Varner is one. In recognition of Veterans Day, please rise and join us in the presentation of colors posted by the DU and Metro State Army ROTC Color Guard. One thing we like to do here at DU and at Daniels is to acknowledge the service of those of you that have been in the military or are currently in the military. Again, thank you for your service. As some of you may know, we have used the World War II 10th Mountain Division as a backdrop for our experiential curricular components at Daniels. Not only were the men of the 10th brave soldiers, but they also were known as innovators. Among the items that were created out of necessity by the men of the 10th were the stretchy, super soft, strong nylon climbing rope, the vibrant boot sole, gasoline-powered camp stoves, dehydrated camp foods, the zip line, the double goose down sleeping bag, just to name a few. On stage with me is Dr. Gail Varner, Associate Medical Director for Colorado's Kaiser Permanente Medical Group, where he is responsible for strategy and financial operations. A veteran, Dr. Varner served as a Colorado Air National Guard flight surgeon, which included an Iraq deployment. Dr. Varner has been responsible for implementing IDEO concepts in the redesign of healthcare services and patient practices at Kaiser. He will make the formal introduction of our speaker by sharing design thinking processes, which he embraced as an executive MBA student here at Daniels in the class of Carrie Plemons, one of our faculty members, And that course was an innovation course, which is a mandatory part of our executive MBA curriculum. Before we move on with the program, I want to thank our partners in sponsorship of this event. Our financial sponsors are U.S. Bank, Grant Thornton, First Bank, CoBank, Financial Executives International, the Daniels Executive and Professional MBA programs, and Enterprise Holdings. We'd also like to acknowledge our new in-kind sponsor, the Mile High SHRM organization. This is an organization of business leaders and professionals with the expertise and knowledge in human resources. Also, in honor of Veterans Day, we would like to thank you to those of you who brought items to be donated to our troops for the holidays. We want to thank you also for participating and thank Karen Dietrich Nathan and her team at Morgridge College of Education for spearheading that effort. We will be taking your questions at the end of the program this evening. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Gail Varner. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. You know it's going to be a great night, and we're going to have a great speaker when there's an introduction for the introducer. So I'll tell you a little bit about my journey here at DU and with design thinking to kind of get us warmed up for some great content from Tom Kelley. I've been a surgeon for 25 years, practiced that craft for about 20. And in that process of education and medical practice and surgery, there's very little, if any, business education, very little really business experience. And so through that process, I have a couple defects. One is I can't stand to see a system problem and walk past it. The second one is I have a big mouth. And so those two things get you into a place where you get a new committee, you wind up being chair on the committee, and eventually you're in a leadership role. And I found myself about 5 years ago on the executive team for Kaiser Permanente. Still hadn't had that business experience I was talking about. I felt like I was a fish out of water. I felt like an imposter. And so for me, it was important to get that content. So I came here to DU, went to Daniels and got an MBA. That was a great experience. I learned so much more than what I thought I would learn about in the breadth of business, and brought so many things back to my job. It was really great. There was one class taught by Carrie Plemons, Innovation, which was mandatory. I'm glad you pointed that out. And the reason is I didn't really want to go to that class. Okay, I'm admitting it now. Carrie's right here. Because I thought a couple key things. I had a couple of false assumptions, and I would challenge you to see if you have those tonight as you listen to this great speaker, Tom, talk about these types of things. I didn't think I was creative. I thought creativity and innovation are awesome for others, not for me. I don't have that. I'm going to delegate that and have other people do it. The second thing is I was in the care delivery arm of healthcare, the healthcare industry, which is more service and quality, process improvement type things. We don't make fancy gadgets and widgets that you can make a prototype out of sticks with. And so that didn't seem to apply either. I didn't think this innovation thing and this design thinking would work. We had a day that was a design thinking practicum, which was transformative for me. And just as a plug, there's a 2-day class in 2 weeks on design thinking. If you have time for that, it's awesome. So we did that, and I found out that my false assumptions were false. And I took back a lot of those practices, the model of design thinking, that methodology to Kaiser. I was really excited about it. Met some other folks who had read about it and learned about it in other places, and we started to apply it to our process, not to widget making. And that went really well. We had worked on some stuff for a long time and had not solved it, and this brought us through that to where we got to a place where we had some great results. It caught fire. The teams that were doing it really were refreshed by the new methodology. They felt like they had a chance to use their right brain and be creative to figure out solutions. And so that is carried on. And in fact, we have in our leadership program, the training program, a design thinking session. Also along this time, Kaiser nationally, my company nationally, has an innovation center that works directly with IDEO and affiliates with this company called IDEO. I hadn't heard of that before. And they're an awesome company. And as you know, better than I do, all the great things that they've been involved in inventing and processes they've improved. And I won't go into that because Tom will talk about some of that tonight. But that's the key. We're lucky enough to have one of the co-founders of IDEO here tonight, Tom Kelley. Tom got his MBA at the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley. And in fact, later Cal awarded him with an executive fellowship just a few years ago. He also has been a worldwide speaker and around the ideas of creativity, innovation, human-centered design, design thinking. He's written 3 books, the latest, of course, I have here, and he's written by his Tom and his brother David. It's a great book. I'd recommend it. So we are lucky enough to have the guru, and we're happy to introduce him, Mr. Tom Kelley. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Great, thank you very much. That was sweet. Okay. Wow, hi, good evening. Big crowd tonight, huh? So, I'm going to talk about nurturing a culture of creative confidence that ties, not coincidentally, into this book that I just spent 6 years of my life working on. And so I'd like to share some of those ideas with you in the hopes that you can get take-home value, that you can get some inspiration to start new conversations, try new things on your own. Oh, and look, they're up. So, a few years ago, you might have seen, it's actually 2 years ago now, Adobe, the software company that you all know, did this survey they called State of Create. And I was really interested in this survey. They interviewed 5,000 people in 5 different countries and asked them a series of questions. You can see the whole survey online. Ask them a series of questions about creativity. And one of the questions had to do with the link between creativity. They specifically said unlocking creativity and economic growth. Because, if you rewind to the beginning of my career in the design world, that link was not made very strongly. It felt like we, on the kind of creative teams or the design teams, we were sitting over at the kids' table while the real work, the real business was being done at the boardrooms and the conference rooms down the hall. But that has changed dramatically now. If you want to succeed, if you want to survive as an organization in the 21st century, you pretty much need to tap into the creativity of your teams, right? And so when Adobe asked people about the link between economic activity or economic growth and unlocking creativity, 80% of people in the world, well, in these 5 countries at least, 80% made that connection. And I love that they called it unlocking creativity, because what we've found in all of our research and in all of our experiences, you don't have to teach creativity. Everybody's got it inside. Right? Everybody had it in kindergarten. They didn't lose it completely. It is buried slightly deeper in some people than others, right? But it is there, and you can unlock it. And I've done lots of interviews, talked to lots of people who did unlock it and see how it changes their lives. In a small way, changes the world, right? But here's the follow-up question, which I thought was more interesting, when they talk about you. How about you as an individual? Do you have a chance to live up to your creative capacity? And as you can see, only 25% of people in the world said yes to that question. So, we live in this world of constrained resources. There's never enough budget. There's never enough time. There's never enough, natural resources to do what you might like to do. And shame on us if we are leaving all of those creative resources just sitting on the table. Right? And so, I've been at this a very long time. I think you might possibly guess I'm playing in the 4th quarter of my career. And, when you get to this point, you start thinking about, the sweep of it, right? And what I realized is, yes, innovation is really fun, right? And we're going to keep working on that. But working on innovators, helping people be more creative, can be even more fun. And so I think this is a worthy question to tackle as organizations. I think this is a question I'm going to dedicate the rest of my career to, which is how might we unlock the creative potential of that other 75%? Because think of that, right? If people down the street are only tapping into 25% of the creative capacity of their team and you've got 100%, wow, let them try to compete with you, right? This is a worthy goal. Right? And so my brother David, who I work with, have worked with for as long as I can remember. I mean, we shared the same bedroom for the first 14 years of my life, right? And so very close to that guy. And so David, you know, is one of the things he's done to pursue this thing of nurturing innovators, of helping others be creative. He started a school at Stanford called the D School. The D does not stand for David. It's for design thinking. It is a multidisciplinary program. It's based in the engineering, the School of Engineering, but it's available to all 7 schools in the university, where they come together and they work in a very multidisciplinary way on complex problems. Right? They use this process that we call design thinking to work on the big problems of the day. So along the way, what he saw was that there are these people that weren't self-identified creative, that came into feeling themselves as creative, and we call that process flipping. And so we started to think about this idea of creative confidence, which we define as the natural human ability, and it's truly a natural ability. That natural human ability to come up with breakthrough ideas combined with the courage to act on them. And as we interviewed more and more people, what we realized was the courage is at least as important as the creativity. Because what we found was there are people who have great ideas in their school, in their place of business, and they've learned, either based on their personality or based on the culture in which they work, they've learned that it's better not to raise your hand, right? They remain silent through the meeting. They let their great idea run down the drain. So they don't have the courage to speak. And there's lots of fears that come into play there. The biggest single fear is a fear of being judged. This is why kindergartners are such great artists. No fear of being judged, right? They just emote, they just pick up the crayon and draw, right? But as we get older, it starts around the 4th grade. As we get older, then we start worrying about that. And so sometimes we don't have the courage, even when we have a great idea, we don't have the courage to act on it. So we did 100 interviews. We talked to these people who, as I said, had flipped, who had gone from non-creative to creative in their own minds. And it's so much fun to be in the room with these people. They kind of glow with energy. And what happens, the really interesting thing is you talk to them more and more, and we spent more than an hour with each of them. As you talk to them more and more, you realize that when they change this, because what happened somewhere early in their life, they opted out of creativity. They said, I'm not creative, right? But when, as adults, they opt back in, it doesn't just identify them as creative, it makes their world bigger, right? They suddenly find that they've got a little more energy. They take on tougher challenges, right? Because they believe themselves creative. They're more resilient in the face of an obstacle. They have more perseverance to see something through to the end. And so these people have a much bigger chance of actually, making a dent in the universe. Right, and there's 100 of these. I obviously not going to tell them all to you, and I will tell you some this evening. But just as a kind of a warm up, I want to tell you about one of my favorites. Is a young woman named Jill Levinson, who worked for an ad agency. And if it's not enough already that people opt out and say, I'm not creative. If you go to work for an ad agency, they got the department, right? That's the creatives over there. Right? And if you're not in the creatives department, draw your own conclusion, right? And so that's what Jill did. Jill said, well, yeah, I'm not creative, right? And she was defining creativity in a way that it was an exclusive club of which she was not a member. Jill loves to cook. She's actually great. She brings in these wonderfully decorated cakes to the office and things like that. She's actually great, but she says, well, I didn't make up the recipes myself. Right? So I'm not creative. I'm just executing other people's ideas, right? And so she's walking around with this sense that, yeah, there's creative people out there, but not me. But then, just for fun, outside of work, she starts playing around with Pinterest. Anybody on Pinterest? Any guys on Pinterest? Because Guys, they don't know you're there. We had the Pinterest people to come to the office, and they don't even look the guys in the eye. They don't care about you, sorry, right? But anyhow, so Jill starts playing around with Pinterest. She's posting things, finding stuff on the web and putting them up there, and she's got like 5 followers. It's her 5 best friends. But then, her posts are pretty good, and then so the friends tell friends, and then she's got 100 followers, and then she's got 1,000 followers, and then she has this one really big post. In fact, if you're on Pinterest, you may have seen this one with the piñata cookies. Right? And this was her most popular post ever. And next thing she knows, she's got 100,000 followers. And then Pinterest itself takes notice and features her, and then she's got 1 million. And by the way, when we were writing the book, she had 1 million followers already, and she's going to probably, before the end of the calendar year, she's going to hit 2 million. And a funny thing has happened, because what she says is, Jill says, I'm not creative in the ways I defined it before, but my followers are telling me I am. My followers are telling me I have a creative eye. I'm a kind of a curator. I'm a creative collector of ideas. And so she has done 2 things. She has, one, expanded the definition of creative in a way that she is then able to do the second thing, which is step into the circle. Right? And in doing so, you can see it in Jill. I ran into her mom in L.A. when I was working on the book, and the mom is glowing and talking about how happy Jill is today, right? And so this is the thing. We are making up our own rules. You can change. You can just decide that you're going to step into that circle. There's a researcher at Yale University we interviewed, 30 years. Robert Sternberg, his name is. He was a professor at Yale for 30 years studying genius and creativity. And what Sternberg told us is, he said, every creative person I came across in all of my years of study, he said they had one thing in common, which is at some point they just decided to be creative. He said creative isn't always the default setting for the adult human brain. And so sometimes you just have to decide. And that's what happened to Jill. She just decided. So if I think about what makes design thinking tick and how people come into creative confidence, there's really 3 elements. I think there's obviously more to it, but for purpose of tonight, you can distill it down into 3 themes that run through all of our work and all of the people we interviewed. And this is the biggest one, which is always start with empathy. Even if you have a technical background, even if you're a great analyst, still got to start with empathy, because then when you create something new, whether you're bringing it to market or you're creating it something internally for your own team, when you create it, people will want it. People will need it because you started with empathy. You started with, what do humans actually need? And humans aren't always great at telling you exactly what they need. And so that's why you've got to observe. You've got to be your own Sherlock Holmes out there observing really carefully what's happening. And so if you try to be like an anthropologist, you have to go beyond asking questions. We live in this world in which data arrives at your desk, right? It is so easy to just sit at your desk. You got your coffee cup right there. The air conditioning is on. It's like, it's really comfortable there. And so some people don't venture out. But got to get out there. Got to see what is actually happening in the world, because 1, people are not behaving the way you expect them to. And 2, people are lying to you all the time, right? They don't mean to, but you watch. You go into the field and you will discover they almost always are. And so just to show that it's not a question of like malice aforethought or bad character or whatever, here's a story about a grandma lying to us. We're in Germany for this project. Our client is a pharmaceutical company. And we're interviewing this elderly woman. As you can see, she's got rheumatoid arthritis, right, which limits her dexterity. And we're asking her, hey, how about those pill bottles? Any trouble with opening those pill bottles? And we're watching her, and she gives us this answer. It's not word for word because it's translated from the German, but basically she says, medicine bottles don't give me any real trouble. Right, so imagine, this is survey data. Imagine you're sitting at your desk with your coffee cup right there, and it comes through in the comments section of the online survey, and you've got a customer, a user, a respondent who says, medicine bottles don't give me any real trouble. What would you be tempted to conclude? I don't think anyone could blame you for thinking, after reading that survey data, that medicine bottles don't give her any real trouble, but you'd be wrong because she is lying, right? But we know she's lying. We can see that she's lying because we're with her in her living room in Germany. And so we ask the follow-up question. Well, really? No trouble? Could you show us? And she, of course, doesn't think she's lying, so she's perfectly happy to show you. Oh, sure, she says. Oh, sure, follow me. And so we follow her, not me personally. Our team follows her into the kitchen, at which point this sweet elderly lady approaches the meat slicer. Right? And I don't know about you, I've seen this photograph more than once, but every time I see this photo, my brain just zooms in on her hand. And I'm asking myself, wait, how close is her finger to that spinning blade? Right? And one of the German engineers that was along on the team says, and yes, and does that slicer still slice meat? Right? Which I think is partly missing the point, but it's also true, right? Once you open about 100 bottles, no way that meat slicing blade is happy, right? And do you ever think about why pharmaceuticals come in those little brown containers? Probably because they don't like light and they don't like air, and who thinks that cap is going back on that bottle? Right? She doesn't mean to, but she is lying to you. And so this is why can't rely entirely on the survey data. Right? I mean, big data is never going away, right? But sometimes you still got to verify. You got to get out in the field and see what people are doing, especially what are people doing that's weird. Because sometimes what they're doing is weird is the opportunity. Because if you spot something that is learning to you that your competitor hasn't learned yet, wow, you got a chance. You got a chance to get a step ahead. And so if one of the tips for doing this, for starting with empathy, is about going out in the field, the second tip, and watching for people lying, the second one is don't think about the millions, right? Many of us work in companies in which we ultimately want to serve millions of customers. And that's good, and that's where market share comes from, and profit margin and all of that, which is great. But at the front end of innovation, you're not going to get your inspiration from the millions, you're going to get it from the ones. And so this is why when you're out in the field, look at individuals. Watch for behaviors. Right? And so I go to Japan a lot. I've been to Japan 30 or 40 times, right? And in Japan, in Tokyo, is the busiest train station in the world. Shinjuku Station in Tokyo sees 3.4 million passengers a day. So if you just take a step back, you see a blur of humanity go by. You see literally millions of people, mainly Japanese salarymen in black suits, right? But you don't learn from the millions. You learn from the ones, right? And so I'm there. I'm in the Shinjuku Station with my friend Kara Johnson from IDEO, a material scientist. And as we're there, standing on the station, and you only got like 3 minutes because the trains are come really fast in Tokyo, we happen to notice, and if I just zoom in a little bit, you'll notice that young woman there has shoes that don't match, right? And I said to Kara, what are we doing here? What are we seeing? And so we start brainstorming on the spot, trying to come up with theories. Theory number one is, this young woman has a pair of shoes almost exactly like those at home, right? But with the orange on the right, of course. Theory number two is she has a girlfriend with the same shoe size, right? But theory number three, which is the most interesting of the theories to me, is maybe there's an opportunity here. Maybe there's an opportunity for some footwear manufacturer or footwear retailer to sell mismatched footwear. Right? And so it's a young audience here, and so you're probably not doing what the average audience does, which is, I can stand back and listen to your brain just snap shut on that idea, right? Because it's silly, it's absurd, it's crazy, right? Well, maybe you won't think it's quite so crazy if I tell you that I buy 100% of my socks from a company that will not sell you a matched pair. If you want your socks to match, mine do match today. It's convenient they had this chair here for this moment. If you want your socks to match, you have to buy 2 sets of 3 unmatched socks, and then you pair them up, and then you got 3 pairs. And this little company, started by a guy from Berkeley, this company is growing like gangbusters. It's got a flagship retail store on Fifth Avenue in New York. It's in all the Disney locations. It's popping up in airport stores. They are everywhere. They have tremendous success with this silly idea. Right? And so sometimes when you see this behavior in the field, defer judgment just a little bit and ask the question, is there something I can learn here? Is there an opportunity here for me? And speaking of opportunities, guys, if you're doing this research in the field, don't be taking pictures of Japanese schoolgirls, right? I did not take this picture. This was Cara Johnson took the picture for me because, no, that would be trouble. So, you got to keep all these factors in mind when you're out in the field doing observations. So, the historical perspective on this, like trying to find insight in the field comes from this French essayist Marcel Proust, who said, the real act of discovery consists not in finding new lands, but in seeing with new eyes. But the seeing with new eyes gets harder and harder as you go through your career, right? As you progress through your career, you develop deep, deep expertise in your field. And that's great. And that's valuable to your organization. But in the process of developing that deep expertise, you've trained yourself to ignore the anomalies, the distractions, where sometimes, like the mismatched shoes, the distraction or the anomaly is the opportunity. And we believe in this so much, this seeing with fresh eyes, that especially when we're working with very senior people, we've coined a term, in fact, we borrowed a term, to describe the mental state we're trying to get them into. There is a word that that's in the dictionary, right? Déjà vu, been there before. Right? But our word is not in the dictionary. It's the opposite of déjà vu, and so we call it vujade, right? And vujade is when you're in a place you've been 1,000 times before, but you see it with fresh eyes. You see it as if you're there for the first time, in the lobby of your own building, on your own website, in very familiar places, but see it in this fresh way so that you can start asking the why questions. Well, why do I do it this way? And so I'll tell you an example from my own life about having a vujade moment. Actually, they come pretty frequently if you exercise this vujade muscle, right? But I'm going in a couple of weeks back to Sao Paulo, Brazil. I was flying one day to Sao Paulo, and I actually listened to the safety video on United Airlines, right? Anybody ever heard that video, right? Anybody heard it less than 100 times, right? So I fly every week, so I've heard it 1,000 times, but this particular day, it actually pierced my consciousness. I actually, heard it, right? And so now that I'm listening, there's some stuff in there. There's some ideas hidden in that video. They start talking about the yellow oxygen mask. First of all, anybody ever had the oxygen mask come down? In the lights, I can't see it, but if somebody by you has their hand up, they have a story, right? This is not a happy day, right? That mask comes down by definition, bad day, right? And so the first thing they say, if you remember that video at all, they say, tug it towards you to turn it on, but they're not very specific, like hard enough to turn it on, but not so hard that you'll pull it out of its socket, right? They could probably be a little better at that, but never mind that. What really got my attention that day is when you get to that little clear plastic bag that attaches to the yellow mask. And what they said that day on United Airlines, on that particular aircraft, is they said, although that little plastic bag may not inflate, and on other airplanes for the same company at the same time, the video would say, although the bag does not inflate. And then I start wondering, well, does not, may not, those are not the same thing, right? But they said, on that day, they said, although the bag may not inflate, oxygen is flowing to the mask. And I have this vujade moment, and I think, wait a minute, they're apologizing, aren't they? What they are saying is, we designed, like 50 years ago, we designed this very important safety device with no interface at all. What they don't quite say is, we could have sprung for a green flashing LED, but we decided to save the money, right? And so think about it. In the history of really, really bad interfaces, I would say very near the top of the list for me was the steam irons of my childhood. Now, the students will not remember a time before LEDs, but trust me, there was a time. And so there's no LED on a steam iron. And so what it did was it just heated up, right? And then, this seems absurd, but definitely true, what we would do is we would lick our finger and put it to the face of a hot iron. And in case you're wondering, yeah, of course we would burn our finger. Of course we would. I can still feel it today, but we'd be darn sure that thing was on, as opposed to this safety mask on United Airlines where the first time you're sure it's not working is when you pass out, right? And so is my point that they should redesign the mask? No. I mean, sure, of course they should redesign the mask, and I'll personally pay for the green LED, but not my point. My point is, how could I have missed it 999 times? It was there in front of me the other 999 times, and I just plain didn't see it, right? And that is vujade. when there is something that's been right there in front of you, and then one day you notice it. And when you notice it, it's easier to notice in other people's worlds before your own. But once you get good at noticing this, you will see it in your own world too. And when you see it, it's often an opportunity for innovation. I'm clicking. Okay, can we go forward a slide? Okay, maybe it will come back later. Maybe it's just tired. Okay, so 100 stories from the book. I told you one. I told you Jill Levinson. I got to tell you one or two more, one more at least. So, Doug Dietz. Doug, perhaps the favorite guy of all the people we interviewed. I love Doug. He works for for GE Healthcare in Milwaukee. And Doug, he's part of the R&D team, and he designs those giant medical imaging devices, the MRIs and the CT scanners and things like that. And it takes a couple of years, 2.5 years, the average cycle of development for these new machines. And the machines, when they're done, they cost over $1 million. And Doug is really proud of his work. He makes these big, beautiful machines, and he's part of the healing process. And so he's really happy. And at places like GE, there's a thing they sometimes call voice of the customer, where you have to go out and see how the thing you worked on looks out in the real world. And so Doug has a chance to go to a local hospital, and he welcomes the chance, and he goes and he talks to the operator, the technician who's running the machine. And he asks her a series of questions. And Doug, looking back on that day, is embarrassed. He says, I asked her all the same kind of self-validating questions. They were all aimed at patting me on the back. He said, did you notice we built this new feature? Did you notice how this works? Have you used this yet? Did you know it was up for an award? It was all those kind of questions, and he'd asked them all, and he'd gotten the answer to his questions, and he's getting up to go. Completely self-satisfied, going back to tell his team what a great job they did, and, as happy as could be. But on the way out, Doug runs into a family. There's a patient, a little girl, who's coming to get scanned in his machine, and she's crying. And the dad, as they pass, he hears the dad say to the little girl, now, honey, we talked about this. You can be strong, right? And Doug goes back to the technician and says, hey, what do you got here? And she says, oh, Doug, you didn't ask me about that. He says, 80% of the kids we scan in your machine, we have to put them under anesthesia. Right, because they can't endure the scariness of your machine. They can't lie still long enough for us to get a decent scan. And Doug, who's this super sensitive guy, has a personal crisis. He goes home and tells his wife that he might have to change jobs, maybe change careers, because he's always been part of the healing process, and now he feels like he makes these big machines that scare the heck out of kids, right? And so luckily for Doug, his boss sent him to this program, the D-School program I was talking about, an executive ed program. And he did this design thinking stuff, and he built prototypes, and he started with empathy, and he worked with people from different companies, the different departments of companies. So it's this very multidisciplinary, cross-functional team that he works on. And while he's there in that program, he comes up with an idea. And he goes back, it's on a volunteer basis. It wasn't like the company was supporting him exactly. He got somebody from the local children's hospital. He got somebody from a kids museum. He got some volunteers from GE, and he set out to change his machine. But you can't redesign the machine. It takes 2 years, and it requires all these FDA approvals. So they didn't redesign the machine at all. They just redesigned the experience. Right, and so Doug's pediatric machines now, oh, wait, it works so well it did twice in a row. Okay, so I'm going to try going back to Doug Dietz and the machine. No, okay, there, stop. Thank you. All right. So this is what Doug's machines look like. There's 9 different designs. But first he covers the machine with graphics. It's these decals they apply to the outside of the machine, no FDA approval required. They do the floor, the walls, the ceiling in some places. And very important to the whole process, they write a script for the operator. So in this machine, this is a CT scanner, and the operator says, okay, now Johnny, we're going to go into the pirate ship today, and when you're in the pirate ship, you got to lie perfectly still, because if you move, the pirate will catch you. You think you can lie perfectly still? Yep. Turns out Johnny can lie perfectly still. And there's a spaceship one in which they say, now there's going to be a big noise, but that's when we make the leap into hyperspace. So don't let that noise scare you. That's part of the hyperspace engine, and you want to stay perfectly still because you don't want to get left behind, right? And so there's a script for every machine. And the anesthesia rate goes from over 80% to under 10% because it's an adventure, because they redesign just the experience of the machine. And Doug says, he says, I work in a business of metrics. He says, everybody's measuring stuff. He says, and the metrics all work out on my machine. He says, the hospital is happier because the throughput of the machines increases so much, right? Because what happens is kid shows up and then they decide the kid needs anesthesia and then they call the anesthesiologist. And if you've ever been in a hospital when they call the anesthesiologist, it's not like they're waiting right outside the door, right? Just as a forewarning in case you ever deliver a baby or anything. You got to plan ahead for anesthesiology, right? And so there's a delay, and it slows down the process of getting scans, right? And when you take that delay out, suddenly they get more use of the machine, more patients can get scanned in a day, so hospitals happy. And GE's happy because their market share goes up and people love their machine and the people keep ordering more of it, more of them and things. And Doug says, I'm happy for them that all their metrics work. And he says, I don't care about any of those. He says, here's my metric. He says, I go back. He says, I don't talk to that technician anymore. He says, she's got nothing for me. I talk to the parents. I talk to the kids. He's back in that same hospital talking one day about, Doug's got this idea about aromatherapy. He thinks that if you spritz the smell of pina colada into an MRI suite, it'll make the experience better. And I said, Doug, really? Pina colada? I said, does a kid even know what a pina colada is? And he says, oh, no, Tom. Oh, no. Not for the kids, for the parents. He says, because they're contributing to the whole stress of the situation. And he says, my theory is that the smell of pina colada triggers a relaxation response in the parent's brain. And he might be right. Anyhow, so he's back there. He's talking to one of the moms about the pina colada aromatherapy idea. And her little daughter, little 6-year-old girl, has just been scanned in Doug's machine. And she comes up and tugs on her mom's skirt. And it's like, Mommy, Mommy, Mommy. Eventually, Mom looks down. And she says, yeah, what is it, dear? And the little girl looks up at the mom and says, Mommy, can we come back tomorrow? So Doug said, I went from 80% of the kids needing anesthesiology to can we come back tomorrow? He says, that's the only metric that I need, right? Doug didn't redesign the machine, he redesigned the experience. In the process, Doug redesigned himself. Doug is now the ambassador throughout GE, teaches courses to GE people about the process he used. He comes to the D school and teaches executive ed programs as well, right? So he didn't just change this space around him. He didn't just change the patient's experience, changed himself in the process. So if the first idea is about starting with empathy, the second one is about treating life as an experiment. And this can be hard because some experiments involve failures. Right? But if you think of it, if you set it up as an experiment, it's not really a failure. It may be called a failed experiment, but that's an expected part of the experimentation process. Right? The historical perspective on this comes from Thomas Edison, who, as part of his process, he's the most prolific inventor in the history of America. But for him, it was all about experimentation and failure along the way. But he said, the real measure of success is the number of experiments that can be crowded into 24 hours. So what Edison was recommending is you just amp up your rate of experimentation, which means you have to do your experiments quicker and cheaper than others do. You have to have this kind of quick cycle of experimentation in which you learn every step of the way. And so an example of a really quick, cheap iteration cycle was we were working with a medical device company. The product on the right is, it's for sinus surgery. It's called the Gyrus Diego. You go in through your nose and you drill up here very near your brain. So let's not think about that too much. But anyhow, so we're early on. We started with empathy. We observed, we went into the operating room. We saw all kinds of opportunities for improvement. And so we start the prototyping process. We're brainstorming one day about what the new device should be like. And this is in our Chicago office, and it doesn't seem to be progressing fast enough for one of our young engineers. And so he leaves the room for 5 minutes. And he comes back with, I think, the quickest and ugliest prototype in the history of my firm. Right? I don't know if you can see what that is. That's a whiteboard marker. And that black thing, now an antique, but that was a Kodak film canister, pried halfway open, and then he put that orange clothespin in there and taped it all together. And he ran back into the room, and he handed his ugly little prototype to the surgeon who's there, a guy who's on the medical advisory board for our client. And he hands it to him, and he says, are you thinking of something like this? And this is a really important moment, because if at that moment, the person, the expert, the person in authority, the boss, kicks you out of the office, like, don't bring that ugly thing in here, like, if they can't squint a little bit and see the raw idea underneath that messy exterior, then innovation shuts down, right? You learn that the idea's got to be perfect before you show it to the boss, and there's so few perfect ideas, you end up not showing anything to the boss, right? And so in that moment, the surgeon did not laugh at him. The surgeon picked up delicately this fragile little ugly prototype and said, yeah, something a little bit like this. I mean, you're not done yet, right? We're clearly not, right? But with the ugliest prototype in the history of the firm, we progressed towards a precise surgical tool. And by the way, the first time I showed that photograph, I was in Texas in a slightly smaller group than this, and a woman raised her hand and said, well, yes, Mr. Kelley, but what if we don't have the kind of creative people that you have that can do these prototypes? And I looked at her and I looked at that prototype and I said, you're kidding, right? Like, is it the Scotch tape you think your people can't do? Because I'm sure they can. And so the lesson I learned from this Gyros Diego project is, got to find a way to lower the bar. Got to try to make it so that anybody on your team, anybody in the organization feels comfortable floating an idea. I mean, the idea won't be perfect yet, but create a culture in which when an unfinished idea comes up, your first reaction is to build on it, as opposed to your first reaction critiquing it. Because at this stage, any idea, and it doesn't have to be a physical product, any idea is so wonderfully easy to critique that you can make a few snide remarks and leave the meeting thinking you've made a contribution, but you haven't, right? In creative cultures, people squint. They look past the surface details. They say, well, not yet perfect, but here's something you could try, right? And so that's a spirit of experimentation, where you say, we are the kind of team that tries stuff. We don't always succeed, but we learn from each trial. And if we can learn faster, if we can prototype ideas faster than others do, learning each time, we will get smarter, we will get better, we will win. Right? And it's all about that culture of experimentation. And so that was a physical product, and many of you, of course, will not go into product businesses, so I just want to make sure that you understand that this idea of experimentation, the idea of prototyping, can apply to any change, anything new in the world. And so an example of this, kind of untethered to products or to research and development, came from Steelcase. I'm buddies with Jim Hackett, the CEO of Steelcase, who called his team together now a long time ago, and he said to them, hey guys, it was mostly guys, he said, hey guys, he said, now we're the largest maker of system furniture in the world, right? That would be cubicles to some of you, but anyhow, largest maker of system furniture in the world, and yet we, the executive team of this company, all live in these nice wood-paneled offices with doors that close. He says, anybody think there's something weird here? He says, well, I do. And so what he could have done next is implemented big change. He could have said, okay, old way, you've got the private offices, new way, you're sitting out in the open, right? But that's not what he did. What he did was he said to his executive team, I propose the following experiment. He says, I'll leave your office intact. I'll bring you out into this open-air leadership community in which we use our own products, of course, right? Bring you into this open-air leadership community, and he says, what I want you to do is give it an honest try for the next 6 months, what they used to call an old college try. I don't think they say that anymore. Anyhow, he said, I want you to give it an honest try, and then he said, and my promise to you, and this is a very important part of the process, because Jim's this guy of deep integrity, and everybody takes him at his word. He says, my promise to you is what's not working 6 months from now, we will address, we will fix. He didn't promise back to your old office. He said, we will address every problem that you identify, right? And so Jim said, had he not done it that way, had he done old way, new way, big change, he said, one by one, every single member of my executive team would have come in to explain why it might work for other people, but it didn't work for them. But instead of that, he just proposed an experiment. And who honestly, when somebody you trust and respect asks you to do a 6-month experiment with them, who honestly could resist, could say, no, boss, that would be impossible for me, right? And nobody did, and nobody objected. And 19 years later, they're still in their open-air leadership community. He made big change. He fundamentally changed the space, and you might have noticed, space is political, right? He fundamentally changed the space in which his entire team worked, right? He made big change, but he did it with a little experiment. And so you can use this technique, this prototyping, experimenting. You have to mean it. You have to mean that you will fix things, right? But you can use this in any change inside an organization. So, I think there's a slide I missed. Let me go back. Ah, there you go. So, remember, start with empathy. Treat life as an experiment. The third of these three is about leveraging the value of prototyping. And this we completely missed for, I would say, the first decade of my firm. Right? When I joined, we were all engineers. Well, everybody except me. All engineers, and we used to think that the data should speak for itself. You know, if you do good work, you know, the truth will out. Well, gee, the data is not very good at speaking for itself. You know, if I give you a number, you know, more than like 2 or 3 digits, I give you a number, you start forgetting it before you leave the room. And yet, all of you are carrying around stories that you heard in your early childhood, right? And so if you've got a message, if you've got something important to say, whether it's to your internal team or to the world at large, wrap your message in a story, because the story will carry your message along. And so in one of my books, in the 10 Faces of Innovation, I have a chapter about storytelling, but never mind that. Way better than my chapter is this great book called Made to Stick by a couple of brothers, Chip and Dan Heath. And Chip and Dan, they talk about how your stories, your message, it seems to fall on deaf ears, right? You say it, but people don't remember. It doesn't stick, you know, in the Malcolm Gladwell sense of the word, right? Your stories don't seem to be sticky, and yet those great urban myths, you know, you hear an urban myth once, and you're good to go. You can tell it to the next 7 people that you see. Right? And they tell many, many urban myths in their book. Their lead story, I think, is a guy goes into a bar, meets a very attractive woman who buys him a drink. And next thing he knows, he wakes up in his hotel room in a bathtub full of ice. And there, beside the bathtub, is a cell phone. And on the cell phone is a Post-it. And on the Post-it, it says, dial 911. And so he does it. He dials 911, and the woman who answers knows right away what it is. Oh, sir, there's a kidney harvesting team in town, and I'm afraid someone may have stolen your kidney, so stay in that bathtub full of ice. We'll send the emergency vehicle out right away. Right? That's not the full story, but you know what I mean, right? You've all heard your own urban myths. And you hear the complete urban myth, you can tell it to anybody, right? And so Chip and Dan say, okay, what's the difference? Why is that urban myth just dying to go viral while your story just doesn't seem to go anywhere, right? And so they spend the rest of the book dissecting urban myths. And I recommend the book, but I'll tell you the story of the book in the next 5 minutes, which is the 6 things that urban myths get so right, and we as storytellers, especially in the business world, don't get right all the time. And this is the hardest one. Simplicity. Dan says, you've got the curse of knowledge. You know so much about your topic. You know the exceptions. You know the history. You know like what's coming next. He says, got to leave all that out. He says, if you want your story to stick, you got to boil it down into the essence of the message, right? What is the one thing you want that person to remember and tell to their best friend? Right? And so they admit this is the hardest part, but find that core message and then build it into your story. The second thing is unexpected. A lot of stories in the business world is like da 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 da. There's no up and down. There's no hero's journey. There's no conflict. There's no resolution. It's just kind of flat, right? But you got to have something unexpected. Some of you saw that kidney harvesting thing coming, but not all of you did, right? There was some unexpected element, at least the first time you heard that story, right? It's like, yeah, I haven't heard that one before, right? Build something unexpected into your story. Got to have concreteness. People have to do theater of the mind. They have to be in the room with you and see the image of it. They have to almost experience it themselves. There's a part of your brain called mirror neurons in which you almost experience it yourself. A part of your brain actually thinks this thing is happening to you. Right? And those concrete details, the cell phone, the Post-it note, the bathtub full of ice, helps you be there in the moment. And that's true of all great stories, is they put you into the moment. They're concrete, they're credible, which is, some source of credibility. Usually it's like a friend of mine this happened to, or sometimes they'll start and say, the Center for Disease Control just said, they're lying completely. You have to have authenticity in your story. But usually in a good urban myth, there's some, something that goes beyond pure myth. They at least attribute it to some source in some way. There's emotion to it, right? You're feeling some sympathy for that guy in the bathtub full of ice. And it's told in the form of a story. It's not, we tend to fall back on PowerPoint and bullets, and if you have a story with the hero's journey in which there's a person in the story that you can identify with, right, it will carry the message better. And so think about your stories, both in your personal life and your professional life. Think about building in that simplicity and concreteness in a way that carries your story forward. And so, example of that, back to Japan for a second. As I said, I spent too much time in Japan. There's this story in Japan, and as nearly as I can tell, 100% of the Japanese population over about age 3 knows this story. The story, it's a true story. It's a story about a dog named Hachiko. And 5 years ago, nobody in America had heard of this dog. And then they made a really bad Richard Gere movie. And then so some people know the Hachiko story from that. But the story, true story, as I said, is Hachiko walks with his master to the train station every day. It's actually not Shinjuku. It's what they call the Shibuya station. They walk to Shibuya station, and the dog sits there and waits all day for the master to come home in the evening. And this is not a short work day in Japan, right? This is one patient dog. Right, so he waits for like 10 hours, and then the master comes back, comes out of Shibuya Station, and they walk home together. It was day after day after day for years, right? And then one day, while the master's off at work, he has a heart attack and dies. And that dog, true story, there's a photograph of the dog. It's a very grainy photograph from 1932. That dog stays rooted to that spot for 10 more years, dies on the spot, right? It's not a story about a dog. Of course, there's a dog in it, but this is a story about faithfulness and loyalty and values that are considered tremendously important in Japanese society. And so because of the values, not because of the dog, because of the values, every Japanese mom and every Japanese teacher tells kids that story over and over again. And so, like I said, everybody in Japan knows that story. And if you go to anybody who is from Tokyo or lives in Tokyo or has even been in Tokyo for more than a week, you can say, I'll meet you at Hachiko, and they will know exactly what you mean. Because there's a statue to that dog, 80 years later, there's a statue to that dog still there, right? Think about your stories. How'd you like people to be telling your story 80 years from now? We don't even need that most of the time, right? If they would just tell 5 of their friends, that would make you really happy, right? So think about how to make your stories better. Think about how to make your stories stick. So we're now deeply interested in storytelling. What we found is if you blend storytelling with behavioral economics, and I don't know, do they teach behavioral economics here? I'm not sure. Anyhow, we've started hiring behavioral economists. It is the social science of behavior change. And when you want to make introduce big things in the world, there's always behavior change. You're trying to get people to change their diet or their exercise, or, in this case, has to do with the water that they drink, right? We're going into rural villages in developing countries, and we're trying to get people to stop drinking the unsafe water, right? And to get the water from some safe source that's available, or at least boil the water that they're using. And what happens, and this is a process the behavioral economists call choice architecture, what happens is you have to guide the story to a point in which you can ask them a question. And you want to ask that question in a way that they will make an answer that is true to their beliefs. We're not talking about convincing them of something. We're talking about letting them see what's the right choice for them, right? And so in this water in India case, what has happened for a long time is a social worker, a really well-meaning person, will show up in the village, and they'll talk about the germ theory of disease, not the most fascinating topic, but talk about the germ theory of disease and tell people why they should, start drinking this safer water. But the safer water is not free. And we're talking about families living very close to the earth, right? That for them to drink the safe water, they probably have to give up something else. And so they stick with tradition. They keep drinking the water, even though, the waterborne diseases are a tremendous public health issue, right? And so eventually, as the well-meaning social worker is there trying to explain this new behavior, they're trying to change their behavior, somebody will raise their hand, and they will ask this objection. They will ask this question, and the question that comes up apparently a lot is, well, my mom gave me water from that well. You're not saying my mom is wrong, are you? And if you're the social worker there in the little Indian village and that question comes up, I would urge you to just pack your bags immediately, right? There's no beating this question. There's nothing you can say at that point that will win people over. Once it's you against their mom, right? You've lost already. And so we sidestep this question completely. And so what we do is we show up in town with our own generator. We have a sheet that we use as our screen. We don't have these silverized, giant hanging from the ceiling kind of screens like we have here, right? And we pass out leaflets during the day. We have singing and dancing at the beginning of our presentation because we found that if you advertise germ theory of disease, not everybody comes, right? But singing and dancing, you can get pretty much the whole village. And once the whole village is there, then we hook up a microscope to our projector. And we have somebody bring us water. We don't have to check in advance. We pretty much know what we're going to see. And this is a terrible iPhone image taken in the dark in an Indian village. But if you can see that green fluorescent square, they see their water in a new way for the first time. Their water is alive with small animals. Right, and it sets you back, and of course it's green fluorescent too, but that's not the water, that's the dye on the slide. But even so, this is really scary, right? And while they're seeing this scary data, we then go to a local water supplier, somebody who's got the safe water. It's not always perfect, by the way, but it's always way better than what people are drinking. We put a drop of that water on there, and you can see how different they are. And then, with both images up there, and the village seeing this kind of new data, or at least the old data in a new way, we just ask a different question. And the different question is, now that you've seen it, never mind your mom did the best she could. Now that you've seen it, you as parents, which water do you want your kids to drink? And if we can get to this point, if we can marry behavioral economics with storytelling and set up choice architecture in this way, it moves the needle. People do switch. There's mass switches in some of the villages as people, having seen the water in a new way, they, never mind what their mom did. They want to do what's right for their kids, right? And so you marry up storytelling with behavioral economics, and you can make change happen in the world. So, 3 ideas. Start with empathy, right? Go out in the field. Don't rely solely on the data that reaches you at your desk. 2, treat life as an experiment. Continuously try things. Have this kind of idea-friendly environment in which you set things up as experiments in advance, so that if it doesn't go right the first time, you say, yeah, we were expecting that, and you do the next experiment and the next until you get it right. And then third, magically, okay. Oh, third, leverage the power of storytelling. Right? Because you have messages. I know you have things you want to express to your friends, to the people around you, to the world, right? And if you can wrap your message in a story, you'll find that it goes out, it goes further, it has more power of its own. So you can do those 3 things well. It will go a long way towards helping you build and nurture and reinforce your own unique creative confidence. Thank you very much. Thanks. So that brings us to the question and answer part of the evening, and my new friend Kate will call on people. If you shout, I'll repeat the question. Oh, I'm not approaching Japanese schoolgirls. We didn't ask her. But it is a trend. Those of you who have, especially tween girls, it's not even, it comes before teens, that a lot of kids doing mismatched footwear. The company, by the way, is called Little Mismatched. I'm not their core target audience, but they have men's products. And really fun. Started by a young guy in Berkeley.
Hold on a sec. Here's one.
Oh, okay, sure. That was the voice of God. Go ahead. Oh, all right. There's 2 microphones. I didn't know.
So we're here talking about business to a business audience. And I know that a lot of the design thinking and innovation that IDEO preaches isn't just about business to a business audience. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure.
And how you've chosen to help spread this thinking to a business audience?
Sure. I mean, it's not spread to a business audience. I mean, we started with the business audience, so we've gone beyond it. I mean, there was some controversy in 2001 when I wrote my first book where there were people in my firm who thought that this was our proprietary stuff. This was the methodology by which we, we did our client work, and that if I told all of our secrets, that might, make it harder to do the client work. But that hasn't proved to be the case. And so we started with the business world, but we're really interested in the world at large now. And so huge percentage of our work is now social innovation. We started our own nonprofit. It's called IDEO.org. We have a thing called the HCD, as in Human Centered Design Toolkit, which is available free to a nonprofit anywhere in the world. It's been downloaded like 40,000 times in 150 countries and things like that. And so I don't know. I think it gets back to that legacy issue. The business stuff is really fun, and I know people, many of you at the beginning of your business career, and that is fabulous. And there is a purpose to business beyond profit, right? And I think that the enlightened companies have figured that out. And so you, as an individual and as a company, can go beyond business. And so we found that to be deeply rewarding. We just redesigned the school lunch program for the city of San Francisco. No business there at all. Really fun. Still at the experimental stage, but we're really optimistic that it will reinvent that experience. So.
Right here.
Okay.
I wondered if you've in your work with a lot of different businesses, if you've encountered lean thinking, right? The whole philosophy about making everything better and faster.
Right.
And in principle 1, defining value in the terms of the customer, it seems dead center on the things you're suggesting. Are you mining that line?
We're not mining lean directly. I mean, I think philosophically we're on the same page. And in some implementations I see of lean, they get so deep into the efficiency of it that they sometimes miss humanity. No, the spirit of it is exactly the same, which is, 1, we want to do continuous improvement, right? And that relates to the experimentation, and start with human values. And so, I think the Venn diagrams overlap a lot, and not completely.
Up in the second level.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah. Thank you. You discussed storytelling and how that's so powerful in moving your message. Just to clarify, maybe, how do you kind of separate kind of propagandistic storytelling from actual like hard evidence wrapped around a story?
Well, this is my friend Peter Guber, who used to be an executive at Sony Pictures. Talks about this. He's got a book about storytelling, and he says, storytelling has gotten a bad rap. That when you say storytelling, a certain percentage of any group thinks you're talking about, like bull, like because you don't have data, so you make up a story, and you can of course always use it toward that end, but the storytelling that we are interested in is distilling the message of something that you personally believe is really important, and then putting it in a form that it just has more attachment points to the kind of human brain, right? And so, everybody's got a different agenda, but I think most of you believe that what you're doing is good in the world, right? If you have good intentions and you use storytelling as a way to add power to your message, no harm, no foul. I think that's all to the better.
Right over here.
Wow, getting around.
Thank you for coming. You're inspiring.
Thanks.
Which of your designs or idea or ideas, design, product are you most proud of with relation to impact on changing people's lives?
Sure. So 2 answers. So what are we most proud of? So when we started early in the business, we did all products, right? For the first 15 years, everything with the product. And in that category, very easy answer, the Heartstream defibrillator. We worked with this startup company in Seattle who was the first to bring to market those portable, they call it AED, automatic external defibrillator, and it has saved hundreds and hundreds of lives, right? The old way, the defibrillator was in the emergency room, but hey, you go into cardiac arrest, there's no getting to the emergency room. Statistically, you got 6 minutes, right? And the curve goes down pretty steeply, and it doesn't start at 100% survival rate. And so you need help now, right? You need electricity applied to your heart, basically. And so the company did all the heavy lifting of the project. We did some of the interaction design, and we made this product so dirt simple that anybody can do it, right? It's like the lowering the bar on prototyping. When we were done, my daughter was 6 years old, and I handed her this defibrillator, disconnected the shock, but go ahead. Handed her the defibrillator and said, "Here, Maya, see if you can make this work." And I swear, my 6-year-old daughter with no instruction could have saved a life with that device. It's got a big 1 and a big 2 and a big 3 on it, and that's about it, right? And so I love that product. We've made, billions of dollars for people like, Apple and Palm and Steelcase and stuff like that. But geez, those lives we saved with the Heartstream, that puts it high on my list. And then non-product, and so now we design, digital experiences. We design, physical spaces. We work on company cultures. We've been approached by some countries. Can you make our country more innovative? But as far as change the world, as far as impact as of today, I'd go back to that human-centered design toolkit, because it's out there, it's free, it's viral, spreading through the world, and people write to us all the time telling us, they're using it in like a country I never heard of, right? And they're getting value from that. And so as far as, you frame it in terms of impact, that's very, very high on my list.
Up in the second row again.
Okay. Oh, second row from the back. Oh, no, I get it. Okay.
Thank you so much for coming. You spoke briefly about individuals who so flip from non-creative to creative.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about organizations that flip,
Sure.
particularly the characteristics between those organizations who get a taste and flip and those organizations who get a taste and don't flip.
Sure. So I focus on the ones that do, of course, but I can tell you where things stalled out. So one of the interviews in the book is a woman named Hanson at Intuit. And Intuit, big software company that you all know. And they had, their management team had an executive offsite, and they decided that they were going to move forward with design thinking. They call it design for delight. But they were going to move forward with this, and that this was the future for the company. And, there's this excitement about it, and as Karen says, nothing happened. Right, and 6 months later, same retreat, same executives, they renewed their commitment to it, and nothing happened, right? And she said, it's not enough. She said, it may be a prerequisite, that executive approval and support, but it's not enough all on its own, right? And so what she did was match that executive support with the grassroots movement. So she started with just 9 people. She calls them catalysts. She just takes 20% of their time. They're spread through the whole organization, but the catalysts get together and they support each other, and they look for design thinking projects that they can tackle. One of the early ones was this thing called Snap Tax. If you've ever seen it, if you have a very simple tax situation, you can take out your iPhone, take a picture of your W-2, answer 3 questions, and your taxes are done. Right, and so when you're at the embryonic stage of a new movement or of a new innovation team, an early success like that really helps, right? Because even the most skeptical leaders within the firm, they tend to be in the middle of the organization, not at the top or the bottom. Even the most skeptical leaders, they still like success, and so if you gain that, it's really helpful. And so we've seen Intuit do it. We saw Procter & Gamble do it. Huge, massive company. But again, top-level support, back when A.G. Lafley was CEO, and then a grassroots movement led by a woman named Claudia Kotchka, who is head of innovation, and she did it by training every group in the company. She says, innovation is not just for R&D. She trained the finance group. She trained HR, right? And so it was executive support from the top and really hard work and perseverance at the front lines. And so pretty much all the successful programs I've seen, I've done that. Samsung, we worked with Samsung in 2000 when, they didn't have a global brand. And by 2005, their brand had eclipsed Sony's brand and has never looked back, right? And so it is possible for organizations to do this. It takes one, leadership, and two, somebody with a lot of heart who's going to push it through, who's going to keep at it over a very long period of time, because cultural change does take time. Well, cultural change takes years, and so somebody's got to have the patience and perseverance to do that.
One right here.
Can you speak about the value of diversity in the creative process? We talk a lot about American pride, and the way back to success all over the world is to get that creative energy going. But I see creativity all over the world. You must as well.
Sure. Well, I mean, there's 200 sovereign nations in the world, so we shouldn't start thinking that we've cornered the market, right? By definition, whatever country you are from, there's more ideas outside of your country than inside your country. But I really believe in diversity as an approach, and it's diversity in all meanings of the word, including diversity of thought, right? Because say you're doing a startup company, and your strategy, your HR strategy is you're just going to hire the smartest engineers in the world, the smartest software people maybe. Well, good luck to you. That is a really, really, really hard game to win. But if you take your software people and your engineers and team them with a scientist and maybe a lawyer and a business person and a anthropologist, you might be able to create a unique multidisciplinary team that the world has never quite seen in exactly this form. And there lies your competitive advantage, right? It's very hard. I mean, there are companies who have done it in the history of the world, but it's very hard in a single discipline to just drill deeper than others have, right? But you can win it. You can win at diversity. I was in Singapore right around the turn of the century, right around the year 2000, and the he was then head of defense, who's now president of Singapore, a guy named Tony Tan. He said, Singapore has done so well. It's actually a remarkable economic story, Singapore. He said, we did so well in the 20th century, all with unity of purpose and hard work. And he said, that's been great. They actually, under the leadership of a single person, Lee Kuan Yew, the GDP per capita went up 100x, which I'm not sure has happened before since in the history of the world, right? And so tremendous success at the end of the 20th century, but he said that was with unity of purpose. And he says, my fear is that in the 21st century, it's going to take diversity of thought. And he says, I'm not sure we're up to that challenge. It turns out that they have through many, many, many innovation programs. But even, in little countries like Singapore, they see that diversity is going to be one of the key success factors, if you're going to survive and succeed in the 21st century.
One last one up in the second level here.
Okay.
There's been some incredible advancements in 3D printing, along with cost and capabilities, and it seems to be right up the alley of design and creativity. Thoughts on this new application tool, hardware, software?
Sure, I'm smiling because I did a book signing in my hometown in the Silicon Valley, and we only took like 7 questions, and 2 of the questions were about 3D printing. I said, what, another 3D printing question? Yes, but I'm with you 100%. 3D printing, I think, is going to change our lives, right? If the older people in the room can remember desktop publishing, right? When it first came, before desktop publishing, hard to imagine this, there were only 4 fonts available to us, regular humans. If you weren't a graphic designer or worked in an ad agency, you had 4 fonts. If you wanted to get really wild, you'd use the Orator font on your IBM Selectric typewriter. And in fact, humans, regular, like person on the street humans, didn't even know the word font, didn't know what it meant, right? And then desktop publishing came along. And those printers, those software as well as hardware, and the printers were so expensive that nobody actually owned one. There would be a service bureau down the street, and you'd take your floppy disks. They were actually floppy back then, and you'd take it and you'd get it printed, because you'd done the layout in some new page layout program, right? And now it's just washed across society, right? Like, you don't think about it all. We don't even send documents anymore. We send PDFs, and then it gets printed out because you assume that the person on the other end has a printer that will print any font in the world, right? And so same with 3D printing. The idea that, I went to Crate and Barrel and bought my silverware, knowing that 1,000 other people in the world have that same silverware because, of course, it has to be mass-produced, right? that is going to go completely away. And it won't start with metal. It will start with the various forms of plastic parts. But so I get to decide everything about the physical environment around me. Right? That's a pretty significant change, and it totally affects this idea about onshore, offshore manufacturing. If you're manufacturing 80% of what you use, in the basement, right? Then this whole offshore thing, like, what do you mean offshore, right? And so, no, I think it's going to be huge. I think we're just at the thin edge. So at IDEO, we have like 4 or 5 3D printers, but they're the, $15,000 varieties. And so just as happened with desktop publishing, the real interesting stuff happens as it gets below $1,000. Then it goes